My name is Eliza Hart, and I live in America, in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in Providence, Rhode Island. The house at 19 Willow Street is the one I grew up in, with its creaky floorboards and faded yellow siding that my father always promised to repaint, but never did. I used to think it was a happy house, the kind where laughter once filled the rooms and birthdays meant balloons taped to the kitchen door. But on the morning of my wedding, that house turned into something else entirely. It became a cage. It was early, around 7:30, when I woke up. The morning sun fell through the lace curtains, painting thin, golden stripes on the wooden floor. I remember the smell of toast and hairspray mingling in the air. My dress, a silk gown I had worked for months to afford, hung from the closet door. I had saved every tip for my job at the Cedar Cafe on Benefit Street, sometimes earning barely $80 a day, to pay for that dress. The final bill came to $2,400, and I remember the woman at the bridal shop smiling when I said I'd pay in cash. It wasn't just a dress. It was the proof that I had built something of my own, dollar by dollar. That morning, my heart raced with nervous joy. I was supposed to marry Adrian Hale, the kindest man I had ever known. He lived in New Haven, Connecticut, and he had this way of talking that made the world seem simple and good again. We met 2 years earlier at a book fair, both reaching for the same old copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. I knew even then that he would treat me like an equal, not like something to be owned. But when I walked into the kitchen that morning, everything changed. My mother, Miriam, stood by the counter, her back stiff, her eyes darker than I'd ever seen. My father, Thomas, leaned against the sink, his jaw tight, the morning newspaper untouched beside him. I said softly, "Good morning," thinking maybe nerves were high, maybe they were just overwhelmed. But no one answered. The air felt wrong, too still, as if the walls were holding their breath. Then, without a word, my father reached into the drawer and pulled out a box of matches. My mother moved toward my dress, which I had laid carefully across a chair in the kitchen to admire one last time. She lifted the hem between her fingers, almost gently, and then my father struck the match. I froze. The flame hissed to life, small and hungry. My mother brought the match to the silk, and in a second, it caught fire. The orange glow climbed upward, licking at the fabric, eating through the lace like it had been waiting all its life to destroy it. The smell of burning silk filled the room. "You won't get married," my mother said. Her voice was low, shaking but steady enough to sting. "We won't let this happen." I could barely speak. My throat locked up, but I managed a single word. "Why?" My father didn't answer. He turned to me, his face red with anger, and before I could step back, he grabbed my wrist and pushed me down the hall. "You'll stay in your room," he said. The next thing I heard was the door slamming shut and the sharp click of the lock. The room was small, the one I'd grown up in, same pale wallpaper, same single window that looked out onto the backyard. I pounded on the door and screamed for them to stop, but my voice was swallowed by silence. Then I heard my father's voice from the hallway, calm and cold, speaking into the phone. "Tell them," he said. "Tell the Hales that the wedding is off. It will not happen." I sat down on the floor, trembling so hard that my hands hurt. The smell of smoke drifted down the hallway. My wedding day, the one I had dreamed about for years, was turning into something unthinkable. But what my parents didn't know was that I had a secret. Months before, after a long argument with my father, I bought a cheap $60 prepaid phone from a small shop near the cafe. I kept it hidden, taped under the old wooden chair by my desk. My parents thought they had taken my real phone, but I had planned ahead. I don't even know why. Maybe some part of me always knew I might need a way out. With shaking fingers, I crawled to the chair, peeled off the tape, and pulled out the phone. My mind was racing. I typed out a message. 911. "My name is Eliza Hart. 19 Willow Street, Providence. My parents burned my wedding dress and locked me in a room. Please help." I hit send and held my breath. The seconds felt like hours. Outside the door, I heard my mother crying, not loud, just soft, muffled sobs. I thought for a moment she might open the door, but she didn't. My father's footsteps moved back and forth. Every so often, I heard him mutter something about shame, about how I was betraying the family by marrying someone they didn't approve of. Time moved strangely in that room. My phone screen glowed in my hand like a tiny star. I checked it again and again, waiting for a reply. Finally, the phone buzzed. A message from dispatch appeared. Help is on the way. Stay where you are. I exhaled, though my chest still felt tight. I crawled closer to the door and pressed my ear against it. My parents were arguing now. My mother's voice was breaking. My father's was furious. I could hear her saying, "She'll ruin everything," and him replying, "Better ruined than gone." I didn't understand what gone meant. I didn't want to. Minutes later, I heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. My heart leaped. I whispered to myself, "They're coming. Just hold on." Then, through the small window, I saw the flash of red and blue lights reflect off the neighbor's fence. A car screeched to a stop outside. Someone pounded on the front door. "Providence Police," a man shouted. "Open up." The next few seconds were chaos. Hurried footsteps, voices raised. My father shouting something about a mistake, and then a crash as the door downstairs burst open. I stayed on the floor, frozen, until I heard the officers moving through the house. When they reached my door, I called out, "I'm here." Back room. There was the sound of wood splintering. Then the door swung open. A tall officer stepped in, his badge catching the light. "You're safe now," he said. His voice was calm, the kind of calm that makes you believe you might survive. As they led me out of that house, I saw my parents standing by the wall, my mother's hands trembling, my father's face white with shock. The kitchen still smelled faintly of burnt silk. I looked once more at the sink, where the ashes of my dress lay scattered, and I told myself I would never come back here. The officers took me outside into the cool air. The sky above Providence was clear, blue, and impossibly wide. It felt like the first breath of freedom I had taken in years. And even though my wedding day had fallen apart, I knew, somewhere deep inside, that this was the beginning of something else. Something I would build with my own hands, no matter how much it costs. The first sound I heard was a car horn, sharp and quick. Then boots thudded against the porch steps. My mother hissed, "Stay quiet," through the door, her voice trembling. I pressed myself against the far wall of my room. My heart pounded in my chest so loudly that I was sure they could hear it from the street. Then came the pounding, hard, steady, official. "Providence Police. Open up." For a few seconds, no one moved. My father must have thought that if he stayed silent, they'd go away. But the officers didn't leave. The knock turned into a demand, the demand into force. The front door rattled against its hinges. My father cursed under his breath, running down the hall. I heard the quick jab of the key in the lock, the frantic scrape of metal against wood, but he couldn't get the door to open. I grabbed my secret phone and sent another message. "Room at the back. Window faces the alley." A moment later, the pounding grew louder, this time on my bedroom door. The wood groaned under the pressure. One strike, then another, then the unmistakable sound of splintering. My father shouted something I couldn't understand, but the words drowned beneath the crash as the door burst open, pieces of wood scattering across the floor. A tall man in uniform stepped in first, Officer Cole Ramirez, his badge glinting under the hallway light. Behind him came Officer June Parker, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her voice steady and firm. Smoke still hung in the air, faint but unmistakable. I could smell the ghost of my burned wedding dress in every breath I took. "You're safe now," Officer Parker said gently, reaching out her hand. I hesitated only for a moment before taking it. Her grip was warm and steady. They led me out of the room, past the hallway mirror that still reflected my pale, tear-streaked face. The kitchen was a wreck. Blackened silk lay in the sink, curling into ashes. My father stood near the counter, jaw tight, arms folded across his chest as if he could stop what was happening by pure will. My mother clutched the edge of the table, eyes wide with disbelief. "Sir, step aside," Officer Ramirez ordered. My father didn't move. He was a large man, shoulders squared, the kind of presence that had always filled every room before I could. But the officer didn't flinch. He took one step forward, another, and suddenly my father's defiance faltered. His hands fell to his sides. "Hands where I can see them," the officer said. "You're being detained for questioning." I watched as they handcuffed both my parents. The sound of metal clicking around my father's wrists was like punctuation at the end of a long, terrible sentence. My mother started crying then, deep, gasping sobs that didn't sound like guilt or sorrow, only disbelief that someone had dared to stop them. Outside, neighbors had gathered on their porches. Mrs. Larkins, the woman from across the street who always wore a pink bathrobe and watered her roses at dawn, stood with one hand over her mouth. I saw her lips move, maybe praying, maybe whispering my name. The police led me down the front steps and into the cool afternoon light. I felt small, my body shaking from adrenaline, but for the first time, I wasn't alone. Officer Parker draped her jacket around my shoulders. "We'll take you somewhere safe," she said. "You've done the right thing." At the patrol car, Officer Ramirez turned to me. "Do you have someone we can call?" I nodded. "My fiancé, Adrian Hale." My voice cracked on his name. They let me sit in the back seat while I called him. The phone rang once, then his voice came through, panicked but clear. "Eliza? Where are you?" "I'm safe," I whispered. "The police are here." "I'm coming right now," he said. "With my mother." When the call ended, I pressed the phone to my chest. For the first time since that morning, I could breathe. The officers took statements from the neighbors while I sat quietly in the car. Through the open window, I could hear the faint hum of people talking, words like fire, locked, and poor girl drifting on the wind. The house that had once been my home now looked like something out of a nightmare. The curtains still fluttered in the open kitchen window, and the smell of burnt fabric lingered in the air. After what felt like hours, a dark blue sedan pulled up behind the police cars. Adrian got out first. His face looked drawn, his eyes full of worry. Beside him was his mother, Ruth Hale, tall and composed, her hand gripping her son's arm. I stepped out of the patrol car, my legs weak. Adrian ran to me, pulling me into his arms. For a long time, neither of us said a word. I could feel his heart beating fast against mine. Ruth came forward and wrapped her arms around me, too. "You're safe now, darling," she said softly. "You're with us." The officers explained everything to them. How I'd been found locked in a room, how the fire had started, how my parents were being charged for endangerment and unlawful confinement. Ruth's face stayed calm, but her eyes were fierce. "We'll take her home," she said firmly. By sunset, we were on the highway to New Haven, Connecticut. I sat in the back seat, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. The world outside the car windows blurred. The gas stations, the green signs, the slow rise and fall of the road. I stared out at the fading orange sky, thinking about how just that morning, I'd believed my life was over. Now, somehow I was free. Ruth reached back and handed me a bottle of water. "Drink, sweetheart. You look pale." I managed a small smile. "Thank you." She nodded. "You're family now, Eliza. We'll handle the rest." Her words wrapped around me like a promise. I leaned back against the seat, exhaustion pulling at my eyes. Adrian turned slightly, his hand finding mine. "We'll get through this," he said quietly. I looked at him, at the same man who had once made me laugh in the aisles of a dusty bookstore, who had believed in me when my own parents didn't, and I felt something settle inside me. Strength, maybe. Or hope. As we crossed the state line, the sky deepened into purple. The city lights of New Haven shimmered in the distance, bright and endless. I thought about how strange it was to lose everything and still somehow find more than I ever expected. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window of the guest room in Ruth and Bernard Hale's blue house, watching the stars above the quiet neighborhood. Somewhere far away, my parents were sitting in a cell, and the house on Willow Street was empty. But here, the air smelled clean. I felt like I had stepped into a new life, fragile but real. I didn't know what would happen next, what the court would decide, or how long the road ahead might be. But I knew one thing for certain. The door that had split open that afternoon had not just freed me from a room, it had freed me from the life that tried to bury me in fear. And for the first time, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could still have my happily ever after. The first morning I woke up in the Hales Blue House in New Haven, Connecticut, I could hardly believe I was free. The guest room was simple and peaceful. Soft yellow curtains fluttered in the breeze. A hand-sewn quilt with tiny green leaves covered the bed, and the faint smell of cinnamon drifted in from the kitchen downstairs. It was the opposite of Willow Street. Every corner of the house seemed to hold quiet kindness. Ruth Hale, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, had made breakfast. She greeted me with a smile that felt like a promise that the world could still be good. "You are family now, Eliza," she said, setting down a bowl of oatmeal sprinkled with sugar. I tried to answer, but the words tangled in my throat. When I finally managed to whisper, "Thank you," my eyes filled with tears. Ruth didn't ask me to stop crying. She just placed her hand on mine and said softly, "You don't have to be strong all the time. You already survived." That day, Adrian took off work to drive me to the courthouse. He wore his old gray jacket and held my hand the entire way. The roads felt different, wider, calmer, as if they belonged to a new life. My stomach twisted every few minutes, a strange mix of fear and relief. I kept thinking about how only 2 days earlier, I'd been behind a locked door, wondering if anyone would ever find me. The New Haven County Courthouse stood tall with white columns and glass doors that reflected the morning sun. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of paper and coffee. My lawyer, Dana Brooks, met us in the hallway. She was a calm woman in her late 30s, with neatly tied brown hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her gray suit looked plain, but her voice carried a quiet confidence that made me feel protected. "Are you ready, Eliza?" she asked. I hesitated. "I think so. I just don't know what's going to happen." "That's all right," she said. "You just tell the truth. I'll take care of the rest." We went through the process step by step. I had to sign forms, repeat my statement, and provide evidence, the photos of the burned fabric, the police report, even the text messages I sent from the secret phone. The filing fee was $85, which Ruth paid with a folded $100 bill from her purse. When the clerk handed her back $15 in change, she pressed the money into my palm. "Buy yourself something sweet later," she whispered with a wink. That tiny act of kindness made me want to cry again. When my name was called, I walked into the courtroom. It was bright and sterile, with rows of wooden benches and an American flag behind the judge's bench. Judge Lillian Price sat at the front, a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a bun. Her eyes were sharp, but her expression was kind. My parents were already there. My father sat stiffly, his face blank, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might break. My mother kept her gaze fixed on the floor, her hands folded in her lap like she was trying to hide inside herself. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The judge began by reading the charges: domestic endangerment, unlawful confinement, and attempted obstruction of marriage. Hearing those words aloud felt unreal, as though someone else's life was being read from a file. When the judge asked me to confirm my statement, I stood. My knees shook, but I kept my head up. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "It's all true. They burned my dress. They locked me in my room. I thought they would never let me go." The room went silent. My mother's shoulders trembled. My father muttered something under his breath, but the bailiff hushed him. Judge Price looked at me for a long moment. "Ms. Hart, you did the right thing by contacting the authorities. You deserve safety and protection. This court will see to it." Then she turned to my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Hart, the state takes this matter very seriously. You will each post bail of $10,000 and remain under a no-contact order effective immediately." The sound of the gavel echoed through the room. One sharp crack that felt like a door closing and another opening at the same time. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. When it was over, Dana smiled at me. "You did beautifully," she said. "You took back your power." Outside, Adrian was waiting by the courthouse steps. When he saw me, he opened his arms, and I ran into them. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel trapped. I felt light, almost free. Ruth joined us, wrapping her shawl tighter against the wind. "Let's go home," she said. "You've had enough courts and papers for one day." That night, the Hales cooked dinner for me. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and Ruth's homemade bread. The house smelled like rosemary and butter. Bernard Hale, Adrian's father, poured sparkling cider into 3 glasses and raised his cup. "To Eliza," he said. "To courage." My voice cracked when I tried to thank them. "I don't deserve all this," I said. Bernard smiled gently. "Everyone deserves a beginning that isn't built on fear." After dinner, Adrian and I sat together on the porch steps. The evening air was cool, and the street lamps cast soft halos of light over the quiet neighborhood. He held my hand, and we talked about the future. "We can rent a small apartment," he said. "There's one downtown for about $950 a month. We'll find secondhand furniture. I saw a couch for $120 online. It's ugly, but we can fix it up." I laughed, a real laugh, shaky but real. "And we can save $50 a week," I said. "Maybe one day we'll have enough to travel. I still want to see Europe. Maybe London or Paris." He smiled. "Then we'll go someday." Through the window, I could see Ruth in the living room. On the mantel, she kept a framed 20-pound note from her college trip to Europe. She once told me she framed it as a reminder that the world was wider than whatever pain you were standing in. Now, that reminder was mine too. Later that night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair. My reflection looked different, not just tired, but stronger somehow. I thought about my voice trembling in court, about the gavel striking wood, about the moment I finally said yes, it's true. I wasn't the girl locked in a room anymore. I wasn't the frightened daughter begging to be believed. I was Eliza Hart, a woman who had found her voice, and used it. Before bed, I whispered a small prayer, not of thanks, but of promise. I would build something out of the ruins. I would make a life that didn't smell of smoke or fear, a life where my laughter didn't echo against locked doors. And as I lay beneath that green-leafed quilt, the world outside quiet and safe, I realized something simple but powerful. Freedom doesn't always come with noise or fanfare. Sometimes, it comes in the shape of a signature on a court document, a borrowed jacket, or a stranger saying, "You did the right thing." That was the night I stopped being afraid of my own story. It was the night I learned that surviving wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The day I finally became Eliza Hart Hale, the sun over Burlington, Vermont, was bright enough to make the church windows sparkle like glass stars. The white wooden chapel stood at the top of a small hill, its steeple sharp against the blue sky. After everything that had happened, I didn't want a grand wedding, no crowds, no glitter, no long guest list. Just peace. Just love. There were only 12 people there that morning. Adrian's parents, his sister Nora, 2 close friends, and a few kind neighbors from New Haven who had watched me rebuild my life piece by piece. My dress wasn't made of silk this time. It was a simple satin gown I'd found in a small thrift shop for $300, soft and light. I had saved the money myself, stuffing every spare dollar into a tin box I'd labeled New Life. As I stood in front of the mirror before the ceremony, I caught my reflection and smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I finally looked like myself again. My hair was loosely pinned, my hands steady. No one was shouting, no doors were locked, and no smoke hung in the air. When the music began, I walked down the short aisle on my own. I didn't need anyone to give me away. My heart was already doing that, freely, willingly. Adrian stood waiting at the end, his eyes soft and bright. The minister's words blurred in my ears until he said the part one remember most clearly. Marriage is not about ownership. It's about choosing each other every day. That single sentence felt like it was written for me. When we exchanged vows, I felt something inside me settle. Not just happiness, but a quiet certainty that I had finally stepped into the life I was meant to have. After the ceremony, we walked out to the small courtyard behind the chapel. The air smelled like lilacs. Ruth hugged me tightly, whispering, "You're home now, my dear." Bernard shook Adrian's hand, his eyes glassy with pride. We didn't have champagne or a big feast. Instead, we drove back to New Haven with takeout sandwiches and a tiny lemon cake that Nora had baked the night before. That evening, our new life began in the same blue house that had first given me safety. We decided to live with the Hales for a few months to save money. Adrian worked part-time at a local print shop, and I found a job at a small bookstore downtown, earning $15 an hour. Every month, I set aside $200 toward groceries and utilities and keep the rest in a savings jar labeled Freedom Fund. The rhythm of life was gentle there. Every morning, Ruth would hum while watering her plants, and Bernard would read the newspaper by the window. Sometimes I'd bake bread with Ruth, learning her recipe that cost less than $3 a loaf. The smell filled the whole house and made everything feel calm. On weekends, Adrian and I would take long walks by the river, holding hands and dreaming out loud about the future. I still had to attend court hearings. The legal process moved slowly, but each visit felt easier than the last. My lawyer, Dana, said my parents were serving their sentence quietly and would be undergoing counseling. When I signed the last document finalizing the protective order, I felt the last chain of fear finally drop away. Some nights, I would still dream of the locked room on Willow Street, the smell of smoke, the sound of the key turning in the door. But when I woke up, I was in a warm bed, with Adrian's hand resting in mine and morning light spilling through the window. Freedom, I learned, doesn't erase the past. It teaches you to live with it and still move forward. 6 months after the wedding, Adrian surprised me with a small envelope. Inside were 2 tickets, round trip to London, leaving in the spring. "You said you always wanted to see Europe," he said, smiling. "We've saved enough." I laughed and cried at once. It wasn't just about travel. It was proof of how far we'd come. A girl who once sat in a locked room, dreaming of escape, was now holding a plane ticket to another continent. That night, I stood on the porch, the same place where I had once whispered my fears. The air smelled of fresh rain, and the sky above New Haven was wide and forgiving. I thought about my parents, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of distant sadness. They had tried to control my life, but in doing so, they had given me something they never intended, the courage to fight for myself. As I turned to go inside, I saw the light from our living room spilling onto the porch. Adrian was waiting there, smiling.
"Come in," he said.
"Dinner's getting cold." And for once, those words, "come in," didn't mean surrender or obedience. They meant home. I stepped inside, closing the door gently behind me. The same door that once symbolized fear now meant safety, love, and beginnings. And that's how my story ends, or maybe how it truly begins. Not with fire or fear, but with peace, laughter, and the simple, priceless joy of opening a door that no one will ever lock again.